So today we begin a new series, and we're entitling it Living the Dream. And I think in our culture we're very familiar with that phrase. But what we often mean by that is, the good life as we design it. But what we're going to discover is that living the dream many times, and for many of us, isn't always the brightest and the best all the time. So we're going to journey with somebody who lived that. His name is Joseph, and he takes up a lot of real estate in the Old Testament in our Bibles. 14 chapters. Very few people get that much time and space. And I want to begin his story with a question that I think really arcs over this whole series. And the question goes something like this: what do you do when you're not sure what to do? What do you do when you have some vague, fuzzy sense, that there's a reason, a purpose, a plan, a direction, but you're not exactly sure what that looks like in the moment? And here's what I've discovered, and maybe you've seen the same, that, when you've journeyed some years and you look back, it's really easy to see how all the dots connect to get you where you are. But when you're at the beginning of that story and you're just looking forward and you don't see the end of the story, it's really hard to see it the same way. I can remember over 20 years ago sitting in a boardroom in Colorado, and I was invited. I was on the East Coast at that time, being a pastor of a church there, and they brought people from all over the country and put us in this room, and it was in a mission agency and talking about sending people around the world and all of that. And I would often sit next to the same person in that room, and we began to get to know each other and just had a really good, strong relationship there. And it was in that context that for the first time I heard of a church called Washington Heights. And he eventually told me about the pastor here who was getting ready to retire, and he said, would you consider that? And of course I said, absolutely not, because we were happy there and then. And so one thing, though, led to another, and kind of the rest is history. And it's easy when you're looking back on that to say, oh yeah, I can kind of see how all those things line up. But when you're looking forward, it's not as easy to do so. And so if you're in that place where you're looking forward and it's a little bit fuzzy, a little bit unclear of what to do, this is your story. And I think Joseph is somebody who can help us to gain confidence in knowing what to do when we're not sure what to do. Or how is it that we can navigate the times where things are a little bit less than clear? And sometimes maybe this prayer has been voiced this way: God, what do you want me to do? And I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but in this context, sometimes here's what it's referred to in a church environment: what is God's will for my life? God, what do you want me to do? Really, that's what we're asking. And so what do we do when that is not crystal clear? So let's journey in the story of Joseph, but I want to take a little bit of a running start to this story and back up a little bit, because I think it's really helpful in understanding his story when it begins. And so we're going to go to a place in Genesis chapter 12 where God comes to a man named Abraham, and he says, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth through you. And I'm going to create a great nation through you. Well, that's interesting, because at that point, Abraham could say, you're going to turn me into a nation? I don't even have more than my wife. It's my wife and I, and we're old. We're not off to a great start when it comes to creating a nation. And God says, trust me. And Abraham does. And he launches out and he leaves so much of his country and his people and his culture and all of that. And he journeys to a destination that he does not even know what it is at the time. And God goes to work, and over time, he does bless them. And there is a child that they have, a promised child. And there's a whole nother one. We don't have time for that part of the story. But the promised child is a son named Isaac. And Isaac turns out to receive God's promise as well. And God recommits his promise that we're going to bless all the nations of the earth through you, and you will become a great nation. And then Isaac has two sons. They are fraternal twins, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob, when he is born, he's actually grasping the heel of his older brother Esau. And it's kind of a theme that will emerge in his life. Jacob becomes a schemer. He becomes somebody who manipulates people. He gets ahead by taking advantage of other people at moments of weakness, and he leverages some of the opportunities that he has to take advantage of others. If we were going to try to think about, who are Esau and Jacob, let me put it in this context, maybe that's a little bit more current. Esau is like Thor, all right? He's big and strong and buff, and he's an outdoorsman. If he shops somewhere, he shops at Cabela's, and he is his father's favorite. And there is this favoritism that's going to show up in generations, by the way. Well, who is Jacob? Jacob is a little bit more like a different character named Loki. And Loki is clever, and Loki is a little bit under the radar and a little bit deceiving, and he's going to use that to his advantage. One day, Esau comes in from hunting all day. He's tired and hungry on the point of starvation. And his brother is there, and he's been preparing some food. And he says, hey, give me something to eat or I'm going to die. Well, yeah, I got some stuff, but let's make a deal. I'll give you this bowl of porridge. You give me your birthright. What's a birthright? That's the lion's share of the inheritance. Esau, in a moment of weakness, says, okay. And you can't undo that once it's done. And so Jacob has leveraged something for his own gain. Sometime later, he actually puts on this Esau cloak, and he tricks his father and goes in and pretends to be his brother Esau. And what Jacob winds up doing, or what Isaac winds up doing, is giving Jacob the blessing that was intended for Esau. But Jacob takes it for himself. Well, on the other side of that, Esau gets so mad to the point that he wants to kill his brother. And so what does Jacob do? He runs off to another country, and there he spends some time with his uncle. His name is Laban. And Laban has a sheep farm that's doing really well. He goes to work for him, and lo and behold, he falls in love with his cousin. Her name is Rachel. In the Bible, it rarely tells us about the descriptions of anybody, but it does about Rachel. It says that she was beautiful in form. Well, Rachel has a sister. Her name is Leah. The description given to Leah is she had weak eyes. And we don't know exactly what that means. But in comparison to beautiful in form, weak eyes is not really a compliment. So Laban has these two daughters, but Jacob has fallen in love with Rachel. It's the one that he admires, the one that he loves. And so Laban says, well, hey, I'll give you Rachel as a wife if you work for me for 7 years. And so Jacob goes to work, and the Bible actually says those 7 years passed like nothing because of his love for her. It's like a lifetime movie, unfolding there for them. But at the end of that time, it's time for the wedding, and so there's this whole deal. But then Jacob, the schemer, gets out-schemed by his uncle, who's also really good at scheming. Because what he does is he substitutes Leah in Rachel's place. And the morning after the wedding, Jacob wakes up, and the old King James says, behold, in the morning it was Leah. And if you wonder in this story, was there any alcohol involved? That's a true statement. And that is part of the story, and you should read that. But then Jacob goes to his uncle, hey, you tricked me, which is something he should have been familiar with. And Laban says, oh, didn't I tell you about a cultural thing? Yeah, here you got to marry off the oldest one, and Leah's the older one, and so that's why I did that. But hey, if you work for me for another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel as your wife. And so he does. And at the end of 14 years, Jacob has 2 wives. What could possibly go wrong there? Well, they begin to compete for their husband's affections, and one of the ways to do that in the ancient world was to have children, and especially in those children to have sons. And so Rachel and Leah begin to have children. Well, really, it's more Leah at the beginning. Leah has a son, and then she has another son, and then she has another son, and then she has another son. And at this point in the story, it's Leah 4, Rachel 0. But Rachel comes up with an idea. She says, I have a servant. Her name is Bilhah. And so maybe I could have children through Bilhah. And so she sets up Jacob with that. And sure enough, Bilhah has one son, and then she has another son. And then Leah says, well, hey, that's a good idea. I got a servant too. Her name is Zilpah. Bilhah and Zilpah, I can't prove that they were twins, but it seems like with the names, their parents dressed them alike and all of that. I don't know, just Bilhah, Zilpah. Zilpah goes on to have two sons, and then Leah has another one, and then Leah has another one, and then finally, Rachel has a son. Jacob's favorite wife, and any sentence that includes the phrase favorite wife, you know is fraught with trouble. But she has a son, and that son born to Rachel, his name is Joseph. Anybody feeling better about their family, and where you came from and where you grew up? I mean, this is jacked up, isn't it? And when you think about the future, okay, God made a promise to Abraham, and right now, this is how it is unfolding here with a guy with 4 wives, and eventually there'll be another son born to Rachel later. There's also a daughter in there. So there are 12 sons, 4 wives, and God, what are you doing? You know what God is doing? God is at work keeping his promise. And right now, this is what he's working with. It's a pretty dysfunctional group of people. And when you think about the future, okay, we're going to become a nation. Well, who's going to become the leader of that? And culturally, back then, the oldest would often be viewed as the one to take over the reins of leadership. And whoever it might be, the one who would be least likely to do that would be the youngest son. And in this story, at this point, that's Joseph. So with that background, let's jump into the story. It's found in Genesis chapter 37. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Has any youngest child ever tattled on their older siblings any time in history? I'm a youngest child. That may have happened once or twice along the way. But we're going to see that, what is a part of Joseph's dynamic at this point? He is prideful. He is arrogant. Could it be that because his father favors him over the rest, that he feels entitled? And part of that is playing out in this part of the story. Now, Israel, and let me just give you a point of clarification, Jacob's name got changed by God to Israel. So Jacob, Israel, same person. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. Anybody familiar with Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat? And this kind of robe that was put on, this was not working clothes. So he's going out and he's going to meet with his brothers who are tending the sheep. He's going to show up in this robe that his father, who favors him, gave him as a present. This is not to get his hands dirty. This is really a visible representation to the other brothers of how much their father loves him more than them. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. So the dynamics in this family are not great. Joseph had a dream. And by the way, this is going to be a dream that God gives him. Sometimes this story is taught this way. Hey, Joseph had a dream and he was a dreamer, so you get a dream and you manufacture this dream inside of yourself. That's not the takeaway from this story. This was a direction that God was giving to him, not something that just came from within Joseph. Because back in those days, there was no Bible. How did God communicate with people? One of the primary ways was through a dream. So Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Isn't that great news, my brothers? You are bowing down to me." How do you think that went over? Not so well. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, but this time Joseph learned his lesson, and so he did not tell his brothers what the dream was. Wouldn't that be a smart move? That's not what Joseph does. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Joseph, listen," he said. "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "But hey, this time, my brothers, you know what? Your stars, right? but you're bowing down to me. But hey, you're stars, right? His father says, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept this matter in mind. God made a promise to Abraham. And right now, it looks like that promise is unfolding in a lot of the wrong ways. But God is going to keep his promise. And right now, though, these are God's chosen people to carry this out. And yeah, they're a mess. And not everybody is following God perfectly within any stretch of the imagination, but God is going to keep his promise. And this is not an overstatement. Here we are all these years later, all these miles from where that happened. And the reason we're here is because God kept his promise. Because eventually those 12 sons would become the 12 tribes of a nation called Israel. And there would be prophets, and there would be kings, and eventually there would come one whose name is Jesus through that nation, and indeed God would bless all the nations of the world, including this one. So here we are. So what do we take away from this story right now, and what might be some steps of faith for us to take based on Joseph's story? Let me suggest a couple steps that we can take, and maybe for all of us there's at least one that we can zero in on. So here's the first one. My past explains me, but it does not define me. I've heard this many times over the years where people go, you know what? The place I grew up, my family of origin or some history in our family, there is no possible way that we could be on God's plan A. I'm lucky maybe to get a plan B. And I know that God works through some people, but he works through the right people and the good people and the people who have it all together. There's no way that God could be working in a family like ours. Or maybe we look back at our own history, our own past, and we say, you know what? In light of the things that I have done, the things that I have said, there's no way God could use somebody like me. Or maybe there are some things that have been done to you, and you feel like those things put you off limits to God's plan A. This is your story, because God is so much bigger than your past. And yeah, your past may explain you in the terms of the ways that you respond to things and the emotions that come up in certain situations and why you think certain things the way that you do. But your past does not define you. God defines you. And God is bigger than your past. And could it be that you need to take a step of faith and trust and entrust your past to the mercy of God? Because he's been working with imperfect people for a long, long time. Why does God work with imperfect people? Because that's all he's got to work with, is people like us. So have you factored your past in as some strike that puts you off limits to God's best? Maybe you need to take a step of faith and trust and to say, no, God is still keeping promises. God is still bigger than people's past. God is bigger. Another step of faith, God is bigger than my messy reality. So one's in the past, one's in the present, right? You may be in the middle of a situation, and we're not excusing any, behavior that kind of takes us off the rails here, but there could be things in your present circumstance that are out of your control. So much of what happens to Joseph is not within his control. And we may wonder in those moments, well, if I don't control those things, how in the world can I be on the right track to get where God wants me to go? And we're going to see one of the themes through this whole story is that wherever Joseph goes and his circumstances are going to be like a roller coaster ride for a while, that God is there with him. He's going to wind up in a prison cell. And it says, God was with Joseph in prison. I don't know about you. That's a line I don't want attached to my life ever. God was with Roy in prison, right? But God was there with him. And so if you see a messy reality right now and you don't see the way out of it, God is bigger than that chaotic present. Is it a step of faith and trust to not ride the emotion of our circumstances, but to trust that God is the dot connector who will cause that story to turn out for good? Another step of faith, God's understanding of timing is better than mine. Have you ever noticed that God is not in a hurry? God is not in a rush. There are many times I think, yeah, this would be great, by Thursday morning, and it's Wednesday afternoon. But the God who stands apart from time understands the time and the places so much better than we do. When is it that Joseph would finally get clarity about this fuzzy dream and what that really meant in lifetime? What is that actually going to turn into? It would be decades before he did. But he will continue journeying with God because he has this unshakable sense that God is at work and trusts him with the timing. Could it be maybe that you've given up on something? Is it time maybe to jump back in to time and trust God with it and the timing of it all? And you say, okay, I can trust my past to the mercy of God. May I entrust my present to the love of God, that he is graciously involved in that. He's bigger than that. And in my future, I can trust it to the providence of God. Providence is God's good and gracious intervention in the lives of people. But what do I do here and now where I live? What am I supposed to do, especially when things are fuzzy and a little bit unclear? We're going to spend a little time with this. God's specific direction comes through alignment with his revealed direction for me. And you will see this in Joseph's life. Even though he doesn't gain clarity of what those dreams mean for decades, all along the way, you know what he does? He follows God in ways that he knows God has called him to follow him. And eventually there is clarity around the specifics on the other side of aligning his life with what God has revealed to him. So let me give you a couple examples of what that might look like, for people like us. You might have somebody in your life who's difficult, maybe a boss who's mistreating you. Or maybe there's somebody in your relational life and they betrayed you, and maybe there's somebody that you would call an enemy. And we might say, God, what am I supposed to do? How do I respond to that? God, what is your will for my life? Well, here's one of the things that Jesus said in the New Testament. Love your enemies. Pray for your enemies. We don't have to wonder about that. Is that the right thing to do? That's what God has revealed to us. And when we align our lives with the revealed things of God, there is clarity on the specific decision that is in front of us. And when we talk about loving our enemies and praying for our enemies, that's not praying for them to drive off a cliff, right? This is honest to goodness prayer for them and their well-being. And so if we wonder, God, what is your will for me? We know that's his will for you. And so as we do what God has called us to do, what he's revealed to us, often we gain clarity in the specifics. Here's another example. We have all kinds of circumstances in our life. Some are good and some are bad. And it's real easy in the middle of bad circumstance to wonder, God, where are you? And what did I get wrong? And what did I miss? What is God's will in those moments? Here's a quote from the New Testament. It's God's will that we give thanks in all circumstances. Even the hard ones? Yeah, even the hard ones. You don't have to think about that. You don't have to wonder about that. You don't have to pray about that. That's something that God has revealed to us. And so as we seek to know what is my specific decision here, clarity with that comes on the other side of aligning our lives with what God has revealed to us. One more example, maybe there's somebody, a man or a woman, they're looking at a business opportunity and they're wanting to factor God in and to bless that in so many different ways. And what has God revealed to us? Maybe they're ignoring this clear thing that God has shown us, that we're called to be radically generous with our lives. But God, would you bless this? Is it any wonder that if we violate the revealed direction of God, that we would lack clarity about the specific decisions in front of us? Or maybe you're in a relational situation, you've been dating somebody for a long, long time, and you wonder, is this the one? Is this the person with whom I'll spend the rest of my days? And maybe you've been living together, sleeping together, and here's one of the things, again, a quote from the New Testament that says it's God's will to avoid sexual immorality. We don't have to pray about that. That's God's will for us. And as we align our lives with what God has revealed, the specifics about the decision in front of us gain clarity. And so God's specific direction comes through alignment with his revealed direction for me. You will see Joseph do that over and over again, where he will do what he knows God has called him to do and trust God on the other side of that. So I want to leave you with a couple things here as we wind down. You are here for a God-given reason, even if you don't understand it in this season. Right at this point of the story, and there are many of us who know the end of this story, and I'm just going to implore you not to jump ahead, but try to journey through this story as the people who are living it. And in this part of the story, Joseph doesn't know. It's just fuzzy, it's weird, it's cloudy. I don't know what it means. But make no mistake about it, there is a God-given reason for him to be here. He knows that. And I just hope and pray you know this, that you are here for a God-given reason. No one is here to take up time and space. And you may not understand exactly what that looks like and what that includes at this point in time, but you have a God-given reason to be here. So take the journey and discover what it is that God has for you. To not have all the answers in a season of life, that's normal. And that's Joseph's story. And maybe it's your story as well. And then we already said this, but maybe to say it another reason that rhymes, because that's what pastors do. When you don't know what to do what you know to do. What? What does that mean? If you aren't sure about your specific decision, do what you know God has revealed for you to do in any aspect of our lives. But the more we align ourselves with what God has revealed to us, the more clarity we gain about the specific decisions in front of us. And this is true in the arena of faith as well. Maybe you're here and you're checking out this thing called church and faith, and maybe one of your past things is that you've experienced some church hurt. I hear about that over and over. And can I just say, I am sorry for what you have endured. And the place that is supposed to be this opportunity to experience God's love and community, maybe it left you with spiritual, emotional, psychological scars. And maybe that causes you to be a little bit unsure about taking a step of faith and trust. And I get that. But when it comes to the arena of faith, we know what Jesus has invited us to do. From his own mouth, what Jesus said? Come to me. Come to him. Put your hope and your faith and your trust and begin a relationship with him. Not with a church, not with a person that's got a microphone on, with him. And if you wonder, well, how do I know that's the right step? Look at his life and his death that he voluntarily gave up on your behalf, that he took up again because he is more powerful than sin and death. He's the one who invites you to come. And you say, well, I got a lot of questions and I got some bad memories with some things. What about those? And he invites you, come to me. And I will give you rest. So you can bring your questions and you can bring your struggles and you can bring some of your bad experiences with you, and you will discover that none of that was him. But he came so that you can belong to him. So maybe it's time to take that step of faith and trust. Well, I'm not sure what to do. There's all kinds of different options. Jesus has made it clear. Put your trust in him. Put your hope and your faith in him. Would you bow your heads together with me as I pray? So Lord Jesus, thank you for who you are. And thank you for all that you have given to us. So much grace and mercy, patience. And God, thank you that you are bigger. Thank you that you are bigger than us and our stories and our dysfunctional families and all the brokenness we bring to the table. God, thank you for who you are. And God, through this journey with a man named Joseph, may we learn to trust you all the more and discover that our hope, our best life, is found with you and following after you. And come what may, and Joseph's going to encounter some huge barriers. God, even in those moments, It's our opportunity to experience you in ways that we cannot anywhere else. And so, God, deepen our level of faith and trust. And maybe for the first time, God, help us to take a step of faith and trust into a relationship with you, knowing that's what you came to do. And that invitation stands open to everyone and anyone. And that's all you're doing. And we thank you for this time together. God bless us as we seek to walk with you. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.